This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. Podcast. Thanks very much to Jessica Wehrman for helming the podcast studio here in my stead. I took a nice little break provided courtesy of the parent company, Fiscal Note, and it was very nice to be able to take an extended time off. And now I'm back. Congress is back. It got back from its August recess this week. National Guard troops are patrolling the streets, looking kind of bored, picking up trash and things like that. States are engaged in redistricting arms races. We're getting a series of retirements and I'm running announcements, which seem to go hand in hand. And, you know, people just seem to want to either come to Washington or leave Washington. And what better way to, you know, sort of break in the new, you know, this new phase of the year than talking to Nathan Gonzalez about our world that we find ourselves in. Nathan, welcome. I know you did the podcast with Jess when I was out, so it's not a welcome back, really.
I'll welcome you back.
Well, thank you.
Jess was great. I mean, I don't know. People are saying that they want more of Jess.
Is it many people are saying?
Many
Is that what
people are saying?
I've heard many people say she's much better.
I've heard, sir, we want more of Jess.
Yes.
There's a lot of, if you just insert sir into there.
I mean, there are a few irreplaceables, of course. There's the gray hair, there's the surly attitude, there's the Hawaiian, you know, sort of the aloha shirts. You know, like I don't know if I'm replaceable, but I'm certainly not indispensable. You know, as we're going to get to, you know, some existential sort of discussions. You know, Joni Ernst will come up in the conversation. But you know, in terms of indispensable men, I mean, what's my favorite Charles de Gaulle quote? The cemeteries are filled with indispensable men. So with that,
well, it's good to be back. It's good. We have, you know, just here in the first few days of September, I feel like the news is coming fast and furious. So we're not easing into anything.
With the new Fast and Furious movie.
Was this number 11? I don't know how many are there.
I think there are 900 actually.
Okay.
I mean, I think in the last one, didn't they go into space? Where else is there to go?
I admit I have not kept up with all of them.
Maybe they'll start interdimensional travel in the next one, a multiverse, the Fast and Furious multiverse, kind of like
my boys are catching up on the Jurassic Park, Jurassic World movies, and it kind of reminded me of Star Wars, how they keep rebuilding the Death Star like over and over, yeah. Like they keep making the same mistakes over and over. But hey, it's compelling cinema.
I feel like there's a political metaphor in there somewhere. You keep hoping for the same, you know, different results with the same plan, and it doesn't quite happen. So,
well done.
Yeah. But by the way, before we get into the politics of it, have you seen the teaser trailer for Star Wars Starfighter, the Ryan Gosling, you know, Star Wars movie that's coming out?
I have not.
So it's the. Matt Smith, you know, like he was one of the Doctor Who's at some point and has sort of lately been kind of a bad guy in a lot of movies. He sounds like he's the bad guy, and it's about Exegol. You know, he's learned the lessons of Exegol, which means nothing to most human beings except for Star Wars fans. But that's like the terrible plot that dominated Rise of Skywalker.
A very dark movie, literally a dark movie.
Well, they couldn't afford lighting at that point. I mean, Disney is, you know, not doing well these days. You know, they had to sort of sacrifice somewhere, so they went indie, went dark. Anyway, back to what we're getting at.
How many people are left listening to this? I don't know.
We've lost pretty much everybody. Which is a great time to delve into our favorite topics. Like campaigns. So, I mean, your latest columns for Roll Call have focused on evenly divided districts, and as well as House districts, that is, and districts that have also swung the most. You know, going from one party's identification to another. And I feel like before I read your first column about evenly divided districts, my first thought was, how is he going to manage this with all of the different redistricting, developments we've had? Texas has signed in to law a new redistricting plan where they're going to try to take 5 Democratic seats, and put them into Republican hands. California, has put into motion a plan, which is like the most Democratic Party thing ever, right? To do the same thing if the voters sign off on it. To sort of, target 5 Republican-held districts and also shore up, some evenly divided districts. And I just thought, like, okay, and then Missouri is going to try this, and then New York maybe, and Indiana, and yesterday in the White House when the president was making his announcement about moving Space Command to Space Comm sounds so like generic sci-fi. Space Command is not that much better, but is moving it from the headquarters from Colorado to Alabama. I thought, like, well, is Alabama going to redistrict now? Even though they just redistricted, one election cycle ago. And I just thought that this seems to be such a perfect illustration of where we are politically, that we don't even know what the districts are going to be like almost a year out.
Yeah, and people should read the column at rollcall.com to see how well we navigated this. But, to take a half a step back, a lot of the conversation about districts and how they perform have to do with just, the presidential results and what happened in 2024, 2020, et cetera. And on the inside election side, what we try to do, we created a metric called baseline, which takes into account 4 election cycles worth of federal and statewide elections. So all elections, not just the presidential, but the Senate, governor, if states have a state auditor or state treasurer, combine those with the House races, put that all together in order to try to find out how does a district with a typical Republican or typical Democrat perform. And so that was, now in crunching those numbers, because it's for all statewide offices, it takes a little while, but we have all those now. And when we broke it all down, the most evenly divided district was actually California's 13th district, which is represented by Democrat Adam Gray. Republicans have a 0.1 baseline Republican advantage, but in November that district could be completely, it could be changed to a Democratic baseline advantage of about 6 points. So that's just one example of how there's a lot of movement and fluidity within this cycle because of this redistricting arms race.
And I think that one of the things, Republicans in particular are very careful not to say this idea is stupid, or this idea makes me uncomfortable because I know my voters, and now I have to introduce myself to a whole new brand of voters, even if they're Republicans. So that's not being said because they don't want to piss off, the president, who has ordered this, has mandated this. But there's a lot of risk that goes along with this because, as you said, the presidential approval, the economy, those things matter more in mid-term elections, as we'll see next year. And, say you take it makes sense to okay, this Republican won, with, 60% in 2022. Let's take this Democratic district that this Democrat only won by 52% and let's give them 4% more Republicans. Well, if you have a wave election, which, happens typically in midterms more than presidential elections, then that puts some people in uncertain territory where they have to work a little harder, and that could be the margin of victory. It's not a done deal in Texas or California or anywhere else that they may be, contemplating this.
Right. With any redistricting, even when it is in a normally scheduled time after a census at the beginning of a decade, parties are making assumptions about what voters might do in the future. And right now, the Republican Party is in this interesting space where is the success that Republicans have had recently, is it based on the success of the Republican Party, or is it unique to President Trump and his ability to turn out a unique coalition that involves or includes more African-American voters or Hispanic voters? And so, this 2026 6 will be the first test of when Trump is not on the ballot. How transferable is that coalition to other Republicans, and then into the future, there will be more tests. So, but Republicans are convinced that how President Trump has done is the baseline. We'll put that as a lowercase b, is the baseline for the Republican Party, and I'm not as convinced that is where things are going to land. And I want to mention, Jason, that as the members get back to Capitol Hill, it has to be interesting that on the Republican side that there are mixed feelings, right? That Texas has been aggressive. It could result in a 3 to 5 seat gain. But then you have Republican Congressman Ken Calvert in California, who, if the new map passes in November, his district was obliterated, right? And so he has to be looking at some of his colleagues,
regardless, right? I mean, he would have a tough race regardless.
Yeah, and in his district, at least he would have, the district that he got reelected in, if President Trump, the White House, and Republicans hadn't been so aggressive and started this arms race. I mean, we can have conversations about gerrymandering and stuff, but California would not have done what it did until President Trump kind of set this off with Texas and now other states around the country.
And, just something like Indiana, like your in-laws are in Indiana, Indiana, you're more familiar with Indiana, not just as a political professional, but, on a personal level too. I mean, it's right now, it just seems like, wow, it's what is it, 6-2, right? Or 8-2 in the House. It's 6. Yeah.
I should know this. I know there's 2 because there's Carson and Mervan.
2 Democrats. Yeah. But that it seems like such a, GOP like dominated state, and it is, but Barack Obama won it in 2008, which came out a little bit out of nowhere. But I feel like, again, as you said, like people make these assumptions that this is the way it will always be, and it never is. I mean, like people change. Like people move in, people move out, people die, people register, people stop voting, people start voting, and chopping up, like taking basically 2 Democratic districts, centered in Indianapolis and Gary, and chopping them up, and spreading out, the Democratic voters. It's not a done deal. I mean, there have been times in recent past where it was a 5-4, like split in Indiana. There were swing districts, people voted, differently, within the last decade or decade and a half. And I feel like it is playing with fire a little bit. Now it's tempting, right? Because the Republicans only have a few seats. I mean, there are 4 vacancies right now, but because of deaths and people resigning. But it's either 3 or 5, in any given day, depending on who's quit or who has not, or who has died. There's that existential thing again. So it's tempting to want to wring out as many seats as you possibly can, but it just is playing kind of with fire, it seems.
And what's interesting, Indiana is a good example of, it's pretty clear that the state legislators who are being told to do this by the White House really aren't that interested, or they're not that excited about it. They don't want to kind of upset the norm. They're fine the way it is, but they're getting all of this pressure from the White House to do it. There was one article as this the Indiana story has been playing out, and it was interesting because one of the legislators said that they were convinced that they would eventually, not this cycle, but eventually Republicans would get more seats anyway, because as the large number of people who are in this country illegally, as they are not allowed to vote, or that they would be, Republicans would gain seats. And I don't know, it was just kind of so matter of fact, assuming that those voters are being allowed, even though it's a felony to do that. I don't know. That stuck out to me.
Yeah, I mean, and also it's just like this is the difference between like magical thinking and data-driven thinking, right? That like we as journalists we try to rely on the data more. As political professionals theoretically want to rely on demographics, polling, voter registration rules, things like that. And what I think we see it when in a lot of these scenarios is like it's like magical thinking, like, oh, because we're cracking down on the DoorDash driver or whatever, that means that all these illegals won't be able to vote, and then all of a sudden we'll magically have a unified Republican government. There will be no Democrats ever elected again, and it's just it's let's just say it, it's bullshit. The Democratic Party is shrinking, but it's not non-existent, and it's not propped up by a bunch of people voting illegally. There's just no data whatsoever to support that.
Right.
And again, therein lies, I think, this issue of like what's driving this? What's driving this is, impulses and people wanting to please the president. I mean, right. It's certainly not data,
or wanting to please or not wanting to upset. Like those can be two different things. I think that there are Republicans on either side that they want to help, or they're just afraid that he's going to fund or support a primary challenger against them, and they're risking their own career if they don't go along with whatever the White House wants to do.
Right. And by the way, I did confirm it's 7-2 right now in Indiana. Seven Republicans, two Democrats, and they've people have mapped out things where it shows that like you can have 9 heavily Republican districts, and I'm like, I'm not so sure. I mean, like that yes, on paper perhaps, but when people start to go into the voting booth, that may change. Which brings me to the next sort of thing, which is that, I mean, some of the data points that we have to look at, to me, polling doesn't tell the whole story, but it does tell a story. And it's one that's backed up by, people participating in a survey. Gallup's most recent approval rating of the president has him at 40%. That is trending down from, the beginning of the year when, he enjoyed a modest, sort of bump. So he's, gone from high 40s to 40. Other polls that are not Gallup have him a little bit lower. I mean, there are some polls that have him a little higher than 40, but there is a trend line going a little bit down. And the thing that stuck out to me the most about Gallup's write-up of this is that Republicans are unified for the most part in their support of the president. I mean, he has a 93% approval rating in this most recent, Gallup survey among Republicans. And like, I think it's 1% with Democrats, which, it's a remarkable divide.
Who is that 1%?
Who's the 1%? Right. Maybe a yellow dog Democrat somewhere, right? A term, one of my favorite terms, which is the people who, they're Democrats in kind of name only, but they tend to vote for Republicans. Maybe because they just don't want to disappoint their mom, like by registering as a Republican.
Valid.
But the thing that stuck out to me is not just that divide, though, which is huge and, not surprising, particularly if you talk to members of Congress or political professionals. It's that among independents, his approval rating is 35%. And again, despite what the White House says, despite what the president's supporters say, he did not win in a landslide in last year. He did not even top 50% of the vote, the popular vote overall. And he largely won because independents, supported him, and people who were starting to not identify as Democrats anymore were either registering as Republicans or they were registering as independents, and they went for him over Harris. So when you have a 35% approval rating among independents, and then that sort of mirrors what's going on with the economy, and then you look at the congressional approval ratings, which are always abysmal, but they had trended way up to 29% at the beginning of the year. They're settling into more familiar territory of 24%. And that's got to make any member of Congress who has a brain a little nervous.
Well, I think Republicans realize they have a little bit of a problem. Just as members return to the Hill, there are meetings going on with the White House saying, we're not going to call it the one big beautiful bill anymore. I think the latest term is the Working Families Tax Bill or something like that. They realize that despite the confidence that has been expressed about the bill, that there is different messaging, that there's gonna be a more concerted effort to have a different message about it. And to me, it's also striking that Republicans portray. There's the narrative, and maybe I'm too online, but there's this idea of these 80-20 issues. And the President Trump has mentioned them in some of his press conferences, that the president is always on the right side of 80-20 issues, that he is in favor of stopping crime and Democrats are pro-crime, or Republicans, or Trump is on the right side of LGBTQ issues, or whatever it might be. But when you look at his job rating, his disapproval rating is higher than his approval rating. On every major issue, he is underwater. His disapproval rating higher than his approval rating. So these two things, it's hard to put them together, that, President Trump is on the side of common sense and on the right side of an 80-20 issue, but yet his overall approval rating is not good. And so I think Republicans have to figure out a way to come to terms with how those can exist at the same time, or maybe the 80-20 stuff is not as big as what they think it is.
So one of the biggest issues, I think, that, it seems, parochial, to some people if you're in Washington, D.C., as we are. But to me, it's a bigger issue because of its high profile. And that's the deployment of the military and the National Guard to Democratic cities. Particularly, they just cities that just happen to be run by, up to this point, Black women, Karen Bass in Los Angeles and Muriel Bowser in Washington, D.C., or a Black man in the case of Chicago, where the president is threatening to send troops into Chicago. And I think he's even mentioned New York. That's Eric Adams, another Black man who thought he was probably in the clear by cutting all these deals with the administration to, drop felony charges against him for corruption. But I wonder if there's a turning point where people just say, like, you know what, like, no, I don't want crime. One, I don't like, I don't like feeling unsafe at any point, and nobody really does. But I also don't really like the idea of, like, people with machine guns walking around my neighborhood when my neighborhood is fine. Like, one of the more ridiculous scenes I've seen, like in the last few days is, National Guard's troops with weapons patrolling Lincoln Park on Capitol Hill, which is like, the scenes of such horrors as, like, dogs running around catching tennis balls, people like me jogging, and other people having picnics at night. Just the horror, like we must have the National Guard to protect us, from all these horrors. And, again, data, like crime's going down in Washington, D.C. Does that matter if you've just been carjacked? No, it still feels, you still feel unsafe, in certain situations. And there are, times when I get annoyed, at like small petty crimes, like people like jumping the turnstiles in the metro,
stealing packages off the porch.
Yeah.
It's so.
But does that mean that? But I wonder, like, does having a military presence and the constant threat of military occupation of a city just get to the point where people are like, I don't like this story anymore. I'd like a new story. I'd like to, like, start working on a new narrative here, because this makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I'm glad this is a 3-hour episode that we planned to talk about this. But to me, there's the data. There's the data, which, okay, I understand that some of that is in dispute, right? What is the validity of the DC crime statistics? So let's even put that aside. That if DC was the most, or one of the most dangerous cities in America, why did President Trump invite the entire country to DC a couple months ago to celebrate the anniversary of the Army, with the parade that just happened to be on his birthday? Why did he invite, Republicans or any people to come to DC for his inauguration in January? That is just irresponsible to invite people to come to the most dangerous rhetoric.
Yeah.
But I think this issue is also an example where President Trump starts in the popular position and then takes it 1, 2, 3, or 4 steps too far, right? On immigration, if he just stayed in the, hey, we're going to go after violent criminals who are in this country illegally, widespread support.
Seems to be an 80-20 issue.
Yeah. But then well, not just violent criminals, but anybody who's in this country illegal, violent or not, you're a criminal, we're going to think about, or we may not. And then it's another step. And they're like, well, we may not, you had legal status in the Biden administration. Now that legal status is revoked, or we may not even know that you are in this country illegally, but we're going to deport you anyway. And then you lose
Right.
people along the way, and it gets more and more.
Right. Or maybe, somebody on a student,
popular.
somebody on a student visa who just mouths off, about like the Middle East, like, because that's never happened. Students have never talked about the Middle East before. Right.
It's clear to me that the strategy from the White House is governing by emergency, by declaring emergencies and using that as the motive to really push executive power. And right now, I think President Trump is governing as someone who isn't really accountable to anyone, and since Congress is letting him do whatever he wants to do, even on tariffs or things that are under Congress's purview, he's going to keep going. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think somewhat of an idealist about the American Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and like our system of government. I mean, I know that it has its flaws, but it's
really?
better than anything else that's been tried. But as a believer in the three branches of government, of the separation of powers, of a healthy competition among the courts and the legislative branch and the executive branch, this is really difficult to watch. Congress kind of just waiting for its cues, and I can't help but think that this is driving some of the retirements. I mean, some of the people who are retiring are just like, I think I can get a job at a hardware store and be happier than working in Congress at this point. And I just this week, we saw some of the reports last week that Joni Ernst was considering retiring, and then she made the announcement this week. And I don't have sympathy for a lot of politicians, but like watching her first, the first ad that brought her to prominence in 2014 when she won her seat against Bruce Braley. And it was this I grew up on a farm castrating hogs, and that's the thing I'm going to do. I'm going to make them squeal in Washington. And, she's just sort of full of all this vim and vigor and so forth. And then, her great, sin against the, Republican doctrine right now and the president was questioning Pete Hegseth about allegations of, sexual harassment. She's a sexual, assault survivor, and she just got hounded on it and decided, not surprisingly, not to run. She also, had like this sort of the most epic of flubs with, at a town hall when she was trying to defend the reconciliation bill that cut Medicaid and so forth by saying, well, we all are going to die, which is true,
Factually true.
But like she did not do herself any favors by sort of dismissing people's fears. Like that's not what people look to from their leaders. They don't look to be like more discomforted. And I just feel like it's just like. People are just like, I don't need this, I don't need to like fight this much. I don't need to like swallow my own pride and my own agency as a member of Congress anymore. I can do almost anything else. And I will, so Tom Tillis, Joni Ernst now. And then the flip side of it is that like Ashley Hinston waited like 5 seconds, right? The body was not cold yet before she went right in with like, I'm here to, kick the illegals out and, make America great. I mean, it was like an AI generated campaign slogan. If you just like asked ChatGPT to come up with like all the greatest hits for, like a MAGA, kind of campaign slogan, it was right there in her announcement. And I'm just like, why? I mean, maybe she's just ambitious, I guess. But like,
she probably thought she was going to succeed Grassley, and Grassley just keeps running. So
yeah.
I don't know. I don't think she thought that it would be Ernst that she would be.
Yeah, the joke in the newsroom was, when Ernst retiring after 2 terms, and then Grassley weighs in is like, she just got here.
She's still got 80 good years left in her.
Yeah, but I mean, it just seems like people are I mean, you interview a lot. You have a lot more contact with actually a lot of members and candidates than I do. It seems like people are worn out by this place at a more rapid rate than they used to be.
Yeah, I think there are people that are here and elected are worn out, but there's still, candidates feel like there are huge problems facing the country. The country is in crisis of some sort, and they want to serve and be a part of the solution. But getting here and then having to work through, the slog of getting things done is probably not as exciting as what maybe they thought, unless they talk to a lot of current or former members.
One person who does seem to be having fun is Tom Massey.
He is constantly in the news, which I think.
But even beyond being constantly in the news, I mean, he filed a discharge petition yesterday to petition for the. He wanted legislation to force the release of the Epstein files in the Justice Department. Shortly thereafter, I mean, the oversight, committee, headed by James Comer, released, several files that they had been granted access to for the Justice Department. But I mean, you look at him all the time, and he's just like kind of whatever, he trolls, his own colleagues, he votes, his own conscience. It seems. I mean, he still, votes primarily along Republican lines, like 95% of the time. It's just like on some of the big ones, like the reconciliation bill, and he's like, nah. I'm not going to add to the debt.
And what makes the Epstein issue potent is that even though Republican leadership want to portray it that it's just Massey that's leading the charge, there are other Republicans that support. All the Democrats are on board for release, and there are some Republicans that even aren't Massey, and that's what makes it hard to just dismiss. And it's maybe the only issue that Republicans haven't been able to fully, or Trump hasn't fully been able to get Republicans to rally behind him, because he did a literal 180 on, for years they were down one path and then, flipped around, and some people haven't made that turn quite yet.
Well, Nathan, I guess we have a little ways to go before we hit the 3-hour mark, but I think actually, like as an editor, I feel like we can
people have had enough.
Put a cork in it, unless you want to start talking about Exegol and and Matt Smith's Sith Lord, like from a 1-minute teaser trailer. No, I wanted, I mean, not to be a downer, and I apologize if but like I do want to acknowledge what the times look like, and as Congress is coming back, what we haven't talked as much about, like what Congress is doing. And part of it is that, I mean, particularly the Republican leaders are so in lockstep with the White House that like they're kind of waiting for orders, it seems. And so to me, that's less interesting than the political environment that's being created by troops in the streets, that kind of stuff. And I think that it's worth backing up a little bit like we have and just saying like what's going on, what is the vibe, because we're still 14 months out from the election. We don't know what it's going to be like, but we do know that right now it's confusing when it's typically not as confusing, it seems, as it is right now.
And what I wrote a column in mid-August, and people can go check it out at rollcall.com, just to try to explain to people that don't live in DC what life is like. And, for us, my wife and I were raising 4 kids, from a senior in high school down to a 3rd grader and a couple in between. And we have federal Trump's intervention and post, like we're just living our lives. I mean, we live in the city, and I'm sure we probably have a higher tolerance for some levels of crime or people that might make other people feel uncomfortable. But I don't know, we don't live in fear. We don't live in a way that, well, if my kid goes outside at 5:30 p.m., he's going to get stabbed in the neck. I feel like DC, the rhetoric surrounding what DC is like, is not exactly what the day-to-day living situation is. Right. So we have DC can get better. There is crime, but it is not. I would rather be in DC than Baghdad. Let's put it that way.
And or even other. I mean, it is. being somebody who grew up in a rural area, went to high school and then college in suburban areas, and now lives in a city, and although a sort of a leafy suburban part of Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, I mean, again, as you said, there's always crime in some fashion, whether it's Cottonwood, Arizona, where I'm from, or Washington, D.C., where I currently live. And I feel like this is, we are being made as pawns in this, and it's not comfortable, and I do resent it because it doesn't also reflect my day-to-day life or most people's day-to-day life. And again, that's not to minimize the trauma of crime or criminal activity, because there is some. I mean, if I were to go out on the street and get punched in the face, which is a possibility when I go get my sandwich for lunch, that will not feel good, but that's not representative of like most of my life here. And I also want to say, like, this is a very nice place to live. And again, as you said, if it was so terrible, why is it, why are there buses lined up with students nonstop, throughout the summer? Why does the president keep inviting people to come? And, why do people keep wanting to go to Congress too?
Yeah. And feeling safe, the word safe, unsafe, or safe is a subjective term, right? The existence of crime and feeling safe, those safe is subjective. And maybe people can feel some of the frustration because you have a little bit of pride in the city, not with full knowledge that there are things that can be better. And I'm interested in taking it all back to Capitol Hill, since we do work for Roll Call, is that, the president asked for $2 billion $2 billion in federal dollars. He said he's going to ask Congress to make DC safer and more beautiful. I'm interested to see where that goes, particularly since Republicans took away $1 billion of DC's own money with that bill. So, okay, we can all agree that DC should be, we want DC to be safe and beautiful. Let's see what that looks like in practice.
And maybe the key there too is get off social media. Stop checking Twitter. Get off Facebook. Get off Instagram. Get off TikTok. Get off all that crap, and go see places for yourself with your own feet and your own eyes and your own ears. Like, just and that goes for Congress too. This goes for, I don't think a lot of good reporting happens through social media. I think a lot of good reporting happens by talking to members of Congress and talking to people who want to influence Congress person to person. And that's the best. I mean, like, your interviews are still with candidates, for inside elections, are typically one-on-one, and you learn more from talking to somebody in person than you do scrolling endlessly through social media.
Yep.
Old men shake. It's old man shakes.
Come to DC.
Clouds.
People are already coming. I know from the Airbnbs that are down on our block, and plenty of people are still coming. And you got to be smart, but it's going to be okay.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to stick around for the words of the week?
Let's do it. I made it this far.
Yeah. We can't say that for the audience necessarily. The words of the week, if I can pull this up because it's a little complicated, is a discharge petition, because we did talk about this a little bit with the Massey stuff. People, might ask, like, what exactly is that? Well, a discharge petition is a way that members can force a legislation to be, to come up on the floor. It's pretty complicated. It's designed to be complicated, the discharge petition, but it basically without getting into exactly what the rules and the clauses all say on it, it's a way that you can ask your colleagues to support the discharge of a petition if it's been bottled up in committee, typically 30 days. If you get 218 signatures, a majority of the House, you can force action of it on the floor. All told, it takes like over a month, kind of for this to happen, from when it's referred to committee, waiting for anything to happen. If something doesn't happen, and then signing a discharge petition, getting the signatures, and you have to wait, several days before that. It's designed to be complicated because leaders like to keep their own influence over things. But that's the words of the week. Discharge petition. It's basically a way that a member can force action without the approval of their leadership to get a piece of legislation out of committee onto the floor.
And not a terrible name for like a DC-based hardcore band.
Discharge petition.
I could see that. I mean, maybe when I first moved here, I missed my opportunity. I should have started that.
It's not too late. You are wearing a black T-shirt, so that's the uniform.
It is. So anyway.
Well, Nathan, thank you again for going to dark places, and thank you for those listeners who may still be there. Thank you. We appreciate it if you stuck around through Exegol to Discharge petition. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, as Joni Ernst likes to remind us,
well, we all are going to die.
Thanks, everybody.